All right, welcome everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. It is 12 noon. Just want to welcome everybody. My name is Nick Fazio. I am a planner and public involvement specialist with WSP, and I am also one of two co-chairs for professional development and continuing education for the Southwest Washington APA, along with my colleague Claire, who's on the call today. This is a free lunch and learn webinar. It is CM credit eligible, and we host these 4 times a year in addition to our quarterly planners forum. So I'm glad that you can join us. We've got a great presentation today. We're going to wrap up right at about 1 o'clock, so we've got a full agenda, and we'll get started in just a moment. But before we do that, we're going to have a social justice moment, which is something that we've started doing in 2021, and hopefully we're going to continue to do that. Additionally, another new feature is that we're going to record the webinar and we're going to post it to our very own YouTube page. So there's more information on that to come, but hopefully for those that have missed the webinar, you'll be able to navigate to our YouTube page and you can check it out at your own convenience. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a social justice officer that serves on the Southwest Washington APA board. His name is Mike Salas. Mike, would you like to say a few words, or should we just jump into the video?
No, actually, I'll say a few words. Just to let you guys know, I'm pretty personable when it comes to meeting people. So I was thinking about 2 things. One, knowing what we do for a living. The other issue is, why are we doing this? And what I mean by this is, what is it that made you get involved in what you wanted to do? For me, I love the outdoors. I love what I do, and I'm very passionate about making a difference. So with that said, and you guys don't have to answer me at all, but it's something to kind of think about, and it's more or less to take away from the video is, why are you doing what you're doing? And as opposed to what you do for a living. So go ahead and run the video. It's only like 3 minutes and 50 seconds.
How do I know? A lot of people, when they think of the phrase, how do I know, they always want to put the what behind it. How do I know what I'm supposed to do? The question that you really should ask is, how do I know why I'm here? Because when you know your why, your what becomes more clear and more impactful. If you know, like for instance, people know that I do comedy, but that's what I do. My why is to inspire people to walk in purpose. So I can do comedy, I can write books, I can be in a movie, because all of it is motivated by my why. In fact, I have a new web series out called Michael Jr. Break Time. We probably just did the 6th episode. It's on YouTube. So every single Wednesday at 3 o'clock, we drop a new episode on YouTube of Michael Jr. Break Time. What it is it's me. I travel around the country and I do stand-up comedy, in case you didn't know. And in the middle of my comedy set sometime, I'll stop and just talk to my audience. And we've been filming this, and it's pretty cool. So we're in Winston-Salem. I'm gonna show you a clip from Winston-Salem. And I'm just talking to this guy in the audience, and he tells me that he's a musical instructor at a school. So I was like, all right, you're a musical instructor, can you sing? Let me hear you sing a song. So this is what happened at the last episode of Michael Jr.'s Break Time. Check it. So you're a musical director? Cool.
Yes, sir.
All right, so let me get a couple bars of like Amazing Grace. Can you do the first part of that? Go ahead.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
Wow. That bro could sing, you know what I'm saying? All right. Now, once you give me the version, is if Your uncle just got out of jail. You got shot in the back when you was a kid. I'm just saying, let me see the hood version real quick, if you know which version I'm talking about. Just see if that exists. Let me see what you got.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now, right now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
Okay, here's what I want you to catch. The first time I asked him to sing, he knew what he was doing. The second time, he knew why he was doing it. When you know your why, your what becomes more impactful because you're walking towards or in your purpose.
And so the message I have about that is, and this will change for each and every one of us, is that why. That's all I got.
I appreciate it, Mike. I thought that was very good and important for us right now. So appreciate that. Give me just a sec here.
I was drinking tons of coffee. I was jittery. I was anxious.
YouTube likes to play ads and was blaring in my ear in the background. Okay. So with that, I think it's time for us to move on to our first module here. We've got two wonderful speakers from the Washington State Department of Commerce that are going to be talking to us about housing. And in case you're in the wrong place, this is a lunch and learn webinar on housing in Southwest Washington. And so we've got two modules here. One is from the Department of Commerce, kind of getting an update on some planning related housing topic issues. And then we're also going to be hearing from four of our colleagues in Southwest Washington, going to be talking about some housing actions that they're implementing in their jurisdictions here. So first, we've got Ann Fritzl, AICP, who is a senior planner with the Growth Management Services at the Washington State Department of Commerce and the unit's lead on housing affordability. She develops guidance for implementing new housing-related planning requirements, administers related grant programs, and provides technical assistance statewide. She also administers the multifamily tax exemption program and is the statewide coordinator on the short course of local planning. So you might have seen her there. I know I have. And before joining Commerce, Ann worked for local governments in British Columbia, Washington State, specializing in transportation planning and urban design. She has a Bachelor's of Science in Economics from the University of Victoria in British Columbia and a master's degree in urban and regional planning from Queen's University in Ontario, Canada. And then we also have Emily Grossman, who's the Senior Policy Advisor for the Community Services and Housing Division at the Washington State Department of Commerce. She's been working in the areas of housing and homelessness for 16 years and has a BA from the University of Washington and a JD from Seattle University. So I will hand it over to them. Please take it away. And feel free to share your screen if you have a presentation. You should be able to do that.
Thanks so much. I do have a presentation. And just to clarify, Nick, how much time do we each have?
Yeah, I think we'd like to keep this section to 20 to 25 minutes. So maybe 10 minutes each and 5 minutes for questions.
Okay, I will move along quickly. So I'm going to share my screen. So I'm just going to talk about the changes to the 2021 housing laws. I came to you before the pandemic to talk about some of the changes before. And so we'll make this quick. I have 9 slides. So the big change was the change to the housing element of the GMA comprehensive plan. which really hadn't been changed for a long time. So HB 1220 was a huge bill. It had many pieces. The first one is it changed the GMA housing goal from something pretty soft, encourage the availability of affordable housing, to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all economic segments. So with that, jurisdictions may want to look at their countywide planning policies for consistency. The second piece is it substantially amended the housing element piece, and it requires Commerce to provide projected housing needs to local governments for moderate, low, very low, extremely low, and low income households, and also for permanent supportive housing, emergency housing, and emergency shelters. So we're going to talk to you briefly about the requirement to allow those that's due in September, but this is for your update. So we're consulting, I'm going to hire a consultant to provide those numbers of housing need at the same time, we hope, as OFM produces their future housing projections, so that you'll get their population projection, and then we'll have some sort of formula based on how you choose within the range from OFM as a county, what the various housing needs are for income bands. We'll provide some recommendations for looking at the type of housing that each band would need, and how to review your zoning to make sure that you have adequate space for those needs. And we'll also be looking at the needs for permanent supportive emergency housing and emergency shelters, looking at point in time counts and other data such as that, and projecting a need county-wide, which would also be disaggregated. The housing element itself, there's some changes. You've already looked at sufficient capacity of land, either through a buildable lands if you're in Clark County, or through a land capacity analysis, but you'd have to look at it more with the assumptions based on the income bands, and have policies for moderate density housing options, including but not limited to duplex, triplex, townhomes. So encourage you to look at larger 4 to 6 plexes, courtyard housing, and row homes. It also includes a requirement to document barriers to housing availability, such as gaps in local funding, anything that your development regulations may be throwing up as a barrier, and consider housing in relation to employment. So jobs housing balance in your community, or if you have like a stationary or high density, are you balancing jobs and locations within that neighborhood? And also consider the roles of ADUs. The other really big piece is to look at disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion in housing. And this follows a lot of discussion about racial concerns. And so local housing elements should look at your zoning that may have a discriminatory effect, any in disinvestment where investment in public facilities is differently focused, or availability of infrastructure, and develop policies that begin to undo those racially disparate impacts, displacement, and exclusion, and identify areas at higher risk of displacement. So specifically historic and cultural communities, looking at investments. Can you put public investments in areas where there's lower income segments, or other equitable development initiatives? Is there surplus land that you can make available in areas of disinvestment? Look at some other items to preserve housing or to require new housing and tenant protections. We already have a little bit of this that we've drawn from our housing action plans in the last round of grants on our linked EasyView website, but we'll be hiring someone to develop some methodologies and some example policies, and develop some workshops. This is the thing that many of you may be struggling with right now. The requirement that by September 30th, or some portions are July 25th, so this next Sunday, is that cities cannot prohibit the transitional housing or permanent supported housing in residential zones. We know that many of those are very highly managed facilities, and we have some examples that we've been collecting. They're not having so much concern. They're just looking at those and how they're managed and where they're allowed. The other piece, the shelters, they're looking at more intensive conditional uses, reasonable spacing, occupancy, etc. This is a requirement that is to be managed by September 30th, and a moratoria is not allowed. So some are using interim ordinances, but if you are updating in 2025, when Commerce provides those numbers, you'll have more detail on the numbers of these types of housing that you'll need to accommodate, and so can fine tune those ordinances at that time. The last piece of 1220, if you've read the bill, it's all highlighted and italicized, which means the governor vetoed it because it was not clear about the difference between ADUs within urban growth areas where we really want them for a variety of reasons, and outside of urban growth areas where they could really increase density and increase demands on public services. So consider the role, especially within urban growth areas, and Commerce hopes to get some additional resources behind that. The requirements must be completed within update, and so keep that in mind. There is no funding at the moment. We are requesting funding for communities to complete this work. But if you are applying for funding for a new housing action plan, you should probably consider the needs for your housing element and take those into consideration as you develop your work plan. There's a couple other housing bills that I want to mention. 5235 dealt with a lot of things about ADUs, but most of it was vetoed for the same reasons, except for this piece about a city or town may not regulate the number of unrelated persons that occupy a household, except when regulated under other things like group homes, etc. So you might take a look at your definitions of family, again, required with the update, but something to consider now if you are looking at that to increase the availability of housing. House Bill 1189, tax increment financing. We've been talking about it in the state for a long time and not having it. And so here it is. And what are the options for pairing that with planned actions or residential targeted areas for multifamily tax exemption, et cetera, to increase the power of that program. House Bill 1070 was already in place for local housing sales and use tax, but it clarifies that you can use it to acquire housing for shelters, etc. So as funding is available to acquire hotels to turn them into shelters and maybe housing, that provides authority. And the last one, this Healthy Environment for All, the HEAL Act. This is mostly for the state to implement the Environmental Justice Task Force recommendations, but it's codified in the GMA and it can be a model for local governments as you conduct some of your equity work. The multifamily tax exemption program was substantially changed. There's been a lot of questions about it, about its effectiveness, its applicability. So there's a new 20-year permanently affordable program, and that 25% of units must be affordable for up to 90 years, and it has to be managed by local government or nonprofit. That's now something that local governments may choose to offer. The program is also expanded to all jurisdictions, so they can offer the 12-year, which includes a 20% of affordable units, or a 20-year program, and provides a lot of work for Commerce. So we're going to be developing guidance to help local governments develop their ordinance, work with developers, a legislative study to look at that effectiveness of the program so far, and stand up an audit program. The more specific pieces is that instead of one multifamily building, you can have a group of multifamily buildings. So now duplexes, triplexes, a number of smaller multi-unit buildings are allowable to be considered one project. And if you're in a place that had high cost, which was over 120% of AMI, that's now discontinued. So the recommendation is if you already have certificates, then you need to finish them, but no new certificates with the high cost provisions. Exciting news for you is that we have 3 grant programs this year. We are again authorized to offer $5 million in grants for the what you know as the 1923 program. Due to the dates in the legislation, we're limited to offering money for housing action plans or implementation of actions that you adopted in your housing action plans. We'll be coming out with applications in early August. We also have $2.5 million for sub-area planning and environmental review for transit-oriented development that increases residential building capacity. And there's a new grant program. This is state and federal, the coronavirus funds for utility connections, both extensions and the connection fees for affordable housing. And so there's various different buckets. For all of these, we hope to come out with the applications in early August. Here's our resources. There's the grant page on the growth management web page. There's a little sign up for our newsletters, which will also be producing any alerts for the grants. Here's our housing planning web page, which has the guidance that we developed with the last round of funding for the housing needs assessment, housing action plans, and the housing element guidance, which will be updated with this new legislation. And then the EasyView website, which is linked on that page, which provides a ton of examples of housing action plans and code changes that we gathered last time. And that was my last slide. You can contact me or Laura Hodgson. Many of you have been working with her on any aspect of this program. Any questions?
And for participants, feel free to use the chat box or raise your virtual hand if you can find that function, and we can take questions for Anne. Anne, I just want to thank you. I thought that was an excellent update. And in particular, I was happy to see some of the provisions that you highlighted. Seemed pretty significant to me. I had the privilege of working in Cowlitz County's code and definitions for a variety of things. And there's a lot of stuff and a lot of codes that are pretty outdated. So these types of provisions will help move the ball forward, that's for sure. Questions for Anne? Okay, well, hearing none, why don't we invite Emily? Emily, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen. And let me do the slideshow. Okay. My name is Emily Grossman. I work in a different division from Anne. So Anne is in local government, as many of you know. I'm in a different division. I work in the Community Services and Housing Division. So my division is the division at Commerce that administers homeless and affordable housing funding, in addition to a bunch of other community services programs like Work First, utility assistance, those sorts of things. So I'm going to give an update from my unit. It'll look a little bit different. And if there are any questions, just let me know at the end. All right. Let me hide this. Okay. So as I said, one of our divisions is the Housing Assistance Unit. It's the division that administers rental assistance for homeless populations and for eviction prevention. And so, as you may have imagined, we've got quite a bit of funding right now that's running through this division because of the pandemic, because there are around, at the height of the pandemic, there were around 100,000 Washington households who are behind on their rent. A lot of concern, as you also may know, because of the governor's eviction moratorium, about people not being able to pay their rent and being evicted. So as you can see on this list, we've had quite a few different funding streams coming through, federal and state funding streams coming through our division for rent assistance to prevent evictions. A total for the biennium is around $1 billion. So typically, to give you an idea of what we usually do, the last biennium, we received $20 million to administer in homeless and eviction prevention funding. So now we're doing $1 billion. You can imagine that we're having some serious up-ramping going on, as are our grantees. So we had actually grant with local governments typically county governments, to be sort of the main grantee for their communities for our homeless assistance and rent assistance funding. So some of you may be feeling this, too, and having to kind of increase your capacity by 500% really quickly to get these funds out the door. Right now, I think that the main money that we're administering are these two at the bottom here. It's from the American Rescue Plan Act, the Emergency Rental Assistance Funds, which we're calling TRAP, and then the the American Rescue Plan Act State Fiscal Recovery Funds. So you can see there, that's a total of about $650 million that we are pushing out right now. The priority for those funds are low-income people who are at risk of eviction. Next, we have a new program in our Housing Finance Unit. Housing Finance Unit is the unit that administers capital funds for affordable housing. This is a new program. We've never run this program before. It's based on a King County program that was created at the beginning of the pandemic. The purpose is to quickly acquire properties to put into service as emergency shelter and permanent affordable housing. The emphasis again is on homeless or at risk of being homeless. So we're mostly thinking about shelter when we're thinking about these funds. The goal is to increase that capacity, to get people off the street, to expand the capacity of emergency shelters to house people and be able to socially distance people according to the CDC guidelines. And these are open to local governments. Local governments can apply for the funds. There's a total of $120 million available. And any questions about this, let me know. I'm happy to connect you with the program manager for these funds. The rest of our housing trust fund competitive rounds will look like this. So we had a historic appropriation from the legislature this year, $360 million. That's more than we've ever received for affordable housing funding. Not all of that will be put through a competitive process. We get a lot of earmarks for affordable housing projects, and this biennium was no exclusion, or no, I can't think of the word. You all probably are thinking of it. But it was typical. So the majority of our funds will go through a competitive process, and then there are a number of earmarks too. You can see the breakdown. We also have priorities that were given us by the legislature. $10 million for cottage communities, which is it's higher density or lower density multifamily housing, detached units. We've got a $15 million set aside for disability populations, so developmental disabilities. We have a $10 million set aside for properties that are currently affordable but are at risk of losing their affordability due to expiring covenants. So we've got $10 million to reinvest into those properties to extend their period of affordability. We've got $20 million just to reinvest into the Housing Trust Fund portfolio. Housing Trust Fund properties, like all other affordable housing projects, are only affordable as long as there is a covenant attached to the property mandating that affordability. So we've got to go back and reinvest in our properties to keep them affordable. As I covered earlier, $120 million for rapid capital acquisition. And then our traditional housing trust fund funding round, we have about $140 million to spend there. Now, a couple of assorted bills that you may or may not have heard of, but that are significant to my unit. The first one was 1277, and 1277 brings in an additional $100 fee. Fees are how we services in Washington state, because we don't have an income tax to put money into the general fund to use for homeless services. We have various document recording fees that bring in that revenue for us. This is an additional $100 document recording fee. 20% of this fee is going to be set aside for operations and maintenance of permanent supportive housing. You're all learning a lot about permanent supportive housing right now. It's permanent housing with services attached, and it's typically used for folks who are chronically homeless or have higher barriers to keeping their housing. 4% of these funds are going to be set aside for our landlord mitigation program. That is a program that provides deposit assistance to landlords who are willing to rent to people who have a housing voucher and might have more sort of mixed backgrounds and on the coming up on their tenant screening that makes them increase financial risk. This is to sort of hedge some of that for landlords so that they'll be willing to take folks on. Of the remaining 80%, 60% of it will go to project-based vouchers. And then funds can also be used for rent assistance, foreclosure prevention, rental assistance for people experiencing homelessness, and tenant education and legal assistance. These are all programs that we run through my division. 5160, this is a bill that we worked on a lot with Representative Macri. It's basically the off-ramp bill from the governor's eviction moratorium. It provides, it authorizes a source of funding for eviction prevention. So that was that $400 million we talked about before. It establishes an eviction resolution pilot project for non-payment of rent cases. So under the terms of this bill, landlords, if people have unpaid rent that was accrued during the pandemic, and then through 6 months post-pandemic, landlords have to offer folks a repayment plan. And the repayment plan has to have certain stipulated terms that are in the bill. And they have to offer to tenants an eviction resolution process to come up with a deal, basically, in lieu of going to court, so that they can get their rent paid up to their landlord's satisfaction. So this bill kind of pilots that process. And it also provides legal representation for indigent tenants. So that's huge. And as far as I know, Washington State is the first state that offers this for tenants. And it's a huge social justice issue, and it was a big win for us. 1236, just cause eviction. This is another one that tenant advocates worked on for many years. Essentially, what just cause eviction means is that from now on, when an eviction term comes to the end, so a person has a 1-year term in an apartment, it comes to an end. At that point, the landlord has to give a 20-day notice before letting the person know that they would like them to move. So this changes that practice. Now landlords can only end a tenancy, even if it has come to the end of the term, for certain causes. And those causes are based on business reasons or health and safety reasons. For instance, harassment, nuisance, and non-payment of rent. So there are still a number of reasons why, but it can't be no reason. And then finally, this is really related to another program that we have. It's a program that reimburses mobile home park residents for moving and disposal of their homes when they're subject to a park closure. So this increases the award that they're able to receive, and it also allows them to receive the full award upfront in cash, rather than only being able to collect it on a reimbursement basis once they dispose of the home. So for instance, if a family or a household wants to move into an apartment and that's what they need to use their money for, they'll be able to do that, which is a huge win for tenants. And I'll stop there. I'm over time. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Another great update. Commerce is really providing a lot of information that's essential for us all today. So any questions for Emily? Okay, well, hearing none, I'm wondering, Emily and Anne, if there's any chance that we can somehow get a hold of your slides as well. I think it might be a really beneficial resource, especially with all those provisions and bills and explanations that are there, as well as links to resources. I think our membership would really appreciate having access to those. That way they can review them again. So maybe we can work on getting those slides from you afterwards.
Yeah, that sounds great. And feel free to connect, after the fact if questions do arise. I'm happy to talk to anybody. And I know Anne is too.
Perfect.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you both. I appreciate it. Great presentations. Next, we'll go into our next module, which is sort of a panel discussion from 4 of our local colleagues in agencies in Southwest Washington. We've got Jenna Kay, who's a Planner 3 with Clark County Community Planning, where she works on a variety of projects and programs related to land use and livability in the county. You've seen Jenna around. We also have George Wynn, who is a long-range planner at Cowlitz County. Before accepting that job, George attended UW Seattle and served in the Peace Corps in Guinea, West Africa. And if you're ever up in Longview, you might find George riding bikes or home brewing some cider from the county's forgotten orchards. We also have Claire Lust, who's the Community Development Director in Ridgefield, Washington. She's got a background in land use and manages long-range and current planning projects for the city of Ridgefield. And then last but not least, we also have Brian Snodgrass, who's a long-range planner, long-range principal planner, with the city of Vancouver. And he's been working on regional, sub-area, and local long-range planning issues since 1998. He's the project manager for Vancouver's Housing Code updates, and he also serves on Clark County's Housing Options Committee, which is examining unincorporated portions of the Vancouver urban growth area. So we will welcome all of them to the stage, and I'll moderate some panel questions and discussion topics that I've got here for you. And so Jenna, I think we're going to start with you. I'd like to hear from all of the panelists briefly, but first we'll go to Jenna. What housing actions are taking place in Clark County, and why did the county decide to go in that direction?
Sure. So Clark County right now is working on a housing option study and action plan project. And this project, we were going to do this even before some of the more recent legislation passed. And the past couple of years, we've had county council who's been interested in housing, and we've done some code updates related to things like ADUs, cottage housing, and manufactured homes. So our next step really was to take a deeper dive in what else can we do in regards to housing to increase options and remove regulatory barriers to building housing. And Clark County, for those of you who don't know, we have a really large unincorporated urban area. So it's about the size of the city of Vancouver in terms of population. And so that's really been the focus of our work, to be consistent with GMA goals and things like that, to focus on this urban area. And so right now that's what we're working on, this action plan and study. As was mentioned in Brian's intro, he's on our stakeholder group. We've got a group of almost 20 people representing a broad range of interests across the county. And we are striving to use a consensus-based approach to come up with some good action strategies. And we chose to do a consensus-based approach because we've heard and seen a lot of the controversy that comes up with trying to change how housing, various housing laws and regulations in local communities. So we're hoping that approach will be successful. And I guess the other thing I'll say is I think probably out of the folks you're going to hear from, we are not as far along as, in terms of this project as some of these other folks. So we are just, we're exploring strategies right now, but don't know what's going to move forward yet.
Great. Well, this is a good forum to sort of chew on some of that. Brian, we'll go to you next. I know that the city of Vancouver is working on about, half a dozen or so strategies. Do you want to jump in?
I can. We're calling our work housing code updates, and kind of using that term advisedly. We are trying to look at relatively low-hanging fruit and looking at perhaps a later stage where we might consider more aggressive options, such as expanding allowances for duplexes or triplexes in single-family zones. But at this point, the focus is on half a dozen different related projects. One is to create a new zoning district that allows a higher density, perhaps single family lots of up to 25 100 square feet to 5,000 square feet, which right now you can only do through building in the multifamily zone. So by doing this, we would hope to ease some pressure on those areas developing for single family uses. We're also similarly looking at creating a new multifamily zoning district that would allow up to 50 units an acre. Right now, to do that, that's essentially only doable in downtown or as part of a mixed use project in commercial zones elsewhere. We're starting to see the market for it, but you can only do it under those circumstances. And we would hope, again, to ease some of the pressure on residential development in commercial zones through that. Looking at adopting a cottage cluster ordinance and looking particularly closely at some of the examples of some of our neighbors, including the county and Ridgefield, who have some experience in this area. And also looking at some adjustments to our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. We adopted some pretty significant changes a few years back, which allow remove the parking requirement for an ADU on site and remove the owner occupancy requirement. But we still want to tweak it a little bit to at least consider some of the historical garages in the western part of the city where that may have been built right on lot lines, side lot lines. Some of those may not pass ADU or building permit muster, but at least we want to make them eligible to be considered. Also looking at adopting some visitability standards, incentives at the building permit stage, also following the examples of some of our neighbors, Ridgefield in this case, to try and incent some of the aging in place type developments in building of new homes, sort of wider doorways, no step access and so forth. And also looking at creating, adjusting our apartment standards to allow apartments, not necessarily with higher density, but with an allowance for shared kitchen and bathroom facilities, which currently we don't allow. So there's a few other related things we're doing in association with that, but those are probably the biggest items that are part of our housing code updates work. We hope to bring some of that forward this fall, beginning in September, to decision makers, and hope to wrap up by the end of the year.
Yeah, good stuff. I know you said it's low-hanging fruit, but those aren't small efforts by any means. I worked on a couple of those similar type housing code updates at the county as well, and I'm sure George will have more to say about that. But before we go to George, Claire, Ridgefield was name dropped a couple times. Maybe you can talk to us about what's happening in your neck of the woods.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. So Ridgefield just finished up our housing code updates project. We got funding for this from the Department of Commerce through House Bill 1923. Actually, and had an interesting, I think, origin story. We have a council member who was previously on Planning Commission who, since he's been involved with planning in the city, has really had a strong interest in affordable housing. So he pushed staff and got other commissioners and council members on board to push staff to act on housing. So like I said, we acquired funding from the Department of Commerce through House Bill 1923. Rather than doing a housing action plan, the city of Ridgefield chose to focus on code updates around increasing missing middle housing in the city. A couple things that we focused on were incentivizing of housing variety within new subdivisions. The city's building out incredibly fast. It's once again the fastest growing city in the state of Washington, and we're looking at less and less buildable land for new subdivisions. However, we really felt like if any time is right, now is the right time to make sure those get built well and are serving our needs for a variety of housing types. If you've ever driven around Ridgefield, you know that we're getting more housing variety, but we're still not passing the eye test for meeting our goals of getting enough non-single family residential housing, and also often seeing that those missing middle products that do get built are sacrificing some quality. So along with incentivizing those products, we focused on a couple other things in the housing updates. One was making sure that our code was more clear and usable for especially duplexes and triplexes. A lot of these things were already permitted in our code, but the implementation was difficult for both staff and residents and developers to interpret. So we really went in and cleaned that up, did some pretty big reorganization of the code just to facilitate missing middle housing development in a way that hasn't been possible. I'm looking forward to the implementation phase and seeing if we got it right. And then we also went a little beyond just the basic code updates, and you know, based on what we're hearing from the community and what we know of our community, we know that it would be hard to push for these more dense housing types without also having better design and development standards. So we really worked on that as well to make sure that when these products get built, they fit in with existing neighborhoods and with what people think of as the good qualities here in Richfield.
Yeah, I like the focus on sort of that missing middle housing. We hear that again and again brought up in discussions about housing everywhere all the time, and yet it's something that seems to be really hard to drive development of. So glad to hear the focus on that. George, what's happening in Cowlitz County? Oh, and I don't think we can hear you, George. Give it a sec. So while George works on his audio, that's okay. We've got some other questions that I've got for you. Claire, we'll go to you and then we'll circle back with George. But I know earlier you had mentioned that public outreach was sort of like there was a big push for public outreach with some of the work you were doing. So can you talk to us a little bit about how have you been connecting with the public, especially as we sort of come out of this pandemic? It's something that's been on a lot of our minds.
Sure, yeah. So as we scoped our housing code updates project, we knew that public outreach was going to be a big part of it. You know, Ridgefield being a place that has grown so rapidly, definitely adding density is a sensitive topic around here. And, you know, normally I wouldn't say that a survey is the best way to reach people, but we had the most successful survey I've ever put out. We had over 400 responses. It was a double survey. So one section of it was sort of a visual preference survey that was focused on possible updated design and development standards. And then the other was more focused on possible code updates, such as those density incentives for missing middle housing. So yeah, it really got around on social media, for better or worse. But we got a ton of good information. I would say that a lot of the responses we saw were just, oh, we don't want any of this. So well, you know, the purpose of the project was to do something, and we were hoping to get a little more detail on, you know, what options that we were actually considering people would go for. That really did help us focus in on doing more work on the design and development standards, knowing that, you know, people aren't necessarily comfortable with more density, but we need it to meet our planning goals. So how can we make that density compatible and an easier pill to swallow for folks? And then we also had some really good outreach with local developers. Mixed bag of opinions there, but you know, these are the people that end up or the builders end up implementing a lot of this code. So they were very helpful as technical advisors.
Yeah, that was a lesson I've learned over the years, is having the construction building industry on board can make or break sort of these updates. Jenna, what about you? How has the public outreach been going?
Yeah, well, so far we have done one survey that was really just about the objectives of our project, because we're looking really broad, so we wanted to make sure it was clear, where we were going and going to focus on. And we've done one online meeting, like public meeting so far. And so I think we got maybe about 100 responses to that survey, which again it's still pretty, conceptual at this point, so, but that's how that went. And then a handful of people at the virtual public meeting we did. I will say our advisory group meetings, we're getting like 10 to like 20 plus people in the audience for those meetings. So they're meeting monthly.
Public attendees.
Yeah, public attendees.
Wow.
We do have a public comment period at the end where we've gotten a couple, but there's definitely a handful of folks who are following us along in the process. So that's kind of where we are so far. We have a lot of ideas of what we could do and can do. We're not quite far enough a lot of it's coming this fall when we're going to do a lot more public outreach. So we're not quite sure, what's going to be most helpful, and it kind of depends on what draft strategies rise to the top. But we like the idea of things like, and we've gotten feedback on trying to do some, tours that people can do on their own. So you don't need to be near anyone. If we can also do a virtual version. Getting people out looking at different types of housing is something that's been appealing. But we're not quite sure what's going to make the most sense.
You can sign me up for the house tour. Like, there's nothing I love more than like driving or walking around and looking at houses. Yeah, no, I think we can all agree that public engagement and outreach has been a challenge during COVID, but my experience has been that there's a lot of new strategies and people are engaged. So there's all sorts of new tools that we're leveraging, and that's been evident. George, how's your sound? I want to make sure we try and get to you if we have any time.
Testing.
Okay, good. Why don't you go ahead and give us a real brief check-in on what's happening in Cowlitz County, and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. We just reached a very positive, important milestone last night. Our Planning Commission approved our housing action plan with some minor alterations. So our elected commissioners in 2017 declared a housing state of emergency. And Nick, while at the county, worked on an ADU code update. Since then, there's also been a mobile home, manufactured home park code update, proposed subdivision and multifamily density bonus updates to rural areas of the county. But this housing action plan is 86 pages, 86-page long document with 65 discrete recommendations. And so we have a huge laundry list of ideas here, stuff to move forward with. And importantly, the Planning Commission is very excited about it. So they requested last night for us to set up a group meeting with the elected commissioners and the Planning Commission at the earliest possible date, so that the Planning Commission could present it to the elected commissioners. Some of the great things in there are providing some consistency for homes with multiple ADUs and triplexes. They're both 3 units, but one requires substantially larger lot areas, increasing the amount of multifamily housing in urban areas of the county, and making our private road standards more consistent with Clark County so that small lots in urban areas could be more easily developed. And so we've got a lot of good stuff. I think our outreach component, we had a survey. It didn't see that much involvement, but where we did have a lot of involvement was with public meetings, through virtual public meetings. So I presented probably at 8 or 9 different meetings since December. including the Housing and Homelessness Task Force, the Planning Commission, our local historic preservation commissions, etc. And we're moving forward. I'm looking forward to that first meeting with the elected commissioners, see what they think and how it moves forward from there. I think those potential implementation grants from Commerce will be useful come fall.
Yes, and George, I know you have a special surprise in terms of some artwork. Do you want to walk us through what I'm about to pull up on the screen?
Sure. So I myself cannot draw, but my colleague Greta can neither draw as well. So we commissioned a set of art to showcase rural medium density housing. That's what we called it. So I think on the top left, there's a quadplex. On the right is a ghost triplex. There's a cottage housing on the bottom left. And then I see some sort of ADU, attached ADU business there on the bottom right. So we wanted to find a way to showcase some of these proposals that match the scale of existing neighborhoods. Happy to send y'all a link to it. It doesn't say Cowlitz County on it anywhere, and it's all public documents, so have fun.
Yeah, and you can see the artist's homepage there on the screen, and I'm sure that we can get that resource to all of the participants here as well. I gotta say, George, I really like this artwork too. I think that it's beautiful and easily digestible and sort of matches the vibe and style, which is really important. Some of you may have recently attended our Looks Good topic, which was a quarterly planners forum where we talked all about visual tools for planners. And George, I think you've done an excellent job here demonstrating how we can use visual elements as planners to further our mission. So we've got 3 minutes left, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up. We're not going to take any questions from participants, but if you have questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box or connect with me via email. But sort of keep your answers here to just a couple seconds. But if you had a magic wand and you could just wave it and make change happen, regardless of political expediency or regulatory constraints or market conditions, what one action would you take to address the challenge of housing in the city of Vancouver? Brian, we'll start with you. Oh, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Big question. I guess I'd say top of my head, I would say, given the magic wand you just gave us, a significant increase in funding available to housing agencies and nonprofits.
Excellent. Jenna, what about you?
Yeah, similar to Brian, I was thinking about make it easier to build really affordable housing. So resources, money, probably a good way to do that.
Claire, what would you do with your magic wand?
I would magic wand developers to be willing to build something that doesn't maximize profit.
My heart right now is in a vice. I feel you, Claire. George, magic wand action, what would you do?
I think I'd magic wand in a bunch more sewers and potable water lines across the outskirts of our existing cities.
That's another huge one. I don't think we have anybody from Skamania County on the line, but I know that there's a community in the county called Carson that's in real need of some sewer development out there. So glad to hear that. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate hearing from all of you. I thought this was good discussion. And if nothing else, it was really wonderful to hear your updates on the housing actions you're taking. We've got 1 minute left, so I will go to our last slide here, which is that we would love to have you join us for our next event. We have a quarterly planners forum coming up August 12th. It's going to be on Zoom, starts around 9 a.m. and runs till about 11:30 a.m. The topic is going to be social justice, diversity, and inclusion. So if you need any professional development or continuing education, or just want to join the conversation on how to move the needle on social justice, I think this will be a good session for all of us. And then just as a friendly reminder, we also have a YouTube channel that's going to be forthcoming. You should see this presentation and the other ones that we record posted up there. So give us some time to get that set up, and you can look forward to an email hitting your inbox directing you to that webpage when it's ready to go. Otherwise,
Nick.
yes, go ahead, Mike.
I just wanted to let people know Reka Strong will be the person that's giving most of the talk at the August 12th meeting. So she's really, really good and knows what she's doing, and you'll definitely take something away from it.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for bringing that to our attention, Mike. It should be a great session. I'm looking forward to it, and you're all invited to attend. We'd love to see you there. Okay, if there's no other final thoughts, we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all so much. Bye.